Welcome back to Business Continuity Awareness Week. Today we are talking with Jason Haas on our part two, our discussion of personal resilience. Jason, just before we left at the end of our last segment, you talked about managing family members through crisis. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, managing family members is very interesting. It's not like managing a team member or anything else because there's so much more at stake. It's very personal, and you know way too much about these people because chances are you grew up with them throughout your life. So it's complex. Um, so one of the first things that we realized in all of this when I was elected to project manage this journey here is there's a lot of ambiguity. We don't have a lot of answers. Answers are changing. What's dad's health status today compared to yesterday? And the why is it that way? Why did we come to this prognosis? Why are the labs turning out this way? What does it mean? What does it mean when a doctor says he's going to fully recover and practically walk on water? And what
Mhm.
does that mean when it doesn't happen? So ambiguity when you're dealing with rapid fire information, just think of like any crisis. You have a deluge of information. You have to sift through it to make it actionable so you can make decisions based on facts. And when you're missing facts, you have to sometimes make leaps of judgment and leaps of faith to get to some sort of decision. So you rise out of that analysis paralysis. Because in a life or death situation of medical care, no decision could cost somebody their lives.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I came in is we would have daily meetings with family members. We would I would document all of the knowledge and things that they would find out or concerns that they had. And I kept a Google Doc. I love Google, great for collaboration. The price is right. Just have to sell your soul a little bit of some PII. But anyways, so gathered everything and ran it like a project. I had each date, my action items, who talked to who, phone numbers, names, dates, times, all these wonderful things. So we could always go back to it and reference it. So that helped with trying to get us out of some ambiguity. But sometimes the ambiguity was always there. It was almost impossible to get out of it because either you miss the nurse rotation or the doctor rotation, so there's only partial information that you can get, or you may have to wait till a next shift rotation, or you try to call the nurse's desk, but like many people, they're overtasked, under resourced, so you might not get a call back until later that night, or maybe even the next day, or maybe you'd have to go chase them down. So I started off all of our meetings with embracing the suck and leaning into the ambiguity of knowing nobody wants to be here doing this right now. I'd rather have dad happy, sitting in this chair, clicking on every device, breaking devices. As part of my dad's journey with Alzheimer's and whatnot, he would crush devices in his chair. And
Uh-huh.
I have a collection on my desk here. I have iPads, Kindles, iPhones, because he had a motorized chair that would lift him up and to get him to stand up. And he would put his devices into the gearing, thinking that was a safe place to put it, and then raise the chair. Um, but that's a whole nother story on how to manage devices for elderly parents who suffer from dementia. Um, but yeah, uh, so in all of that is just we had to lean into this ambiguity. We know we had to reach out to the nurses. We had to reach out to the doctors. We determined reaching out to the hospital advocates that would help advocate for the patients and their families was a great way to unstick stuck things like doctors not returning our calls, nurses aren't returning our calls. This information doesn't make sense. They were our internal advocate within the healthcare system to shake that tree to get information loose when we can. But in the meantime, embrace the suck. Yeah, it sucks having to call a million times. It sucks thinking about a loved one there who's probably in pain and probably even dying. But we can only control what we can, and then we need to find a way to let go of what we can't, because holding on to those parts that we can't control will kill us with stress. And I struggled with that for probably half of December of I wanted to control everything. I wanted to understand everything. I demanded facts. I was running this like it was my own crisis with my own people. And that's just not the case. This is third-party vendor management. The hospital's the vendor. So, they're only going to tell you what they're going to tell you, and there's not much you can do about it. So lead with kindness and empathy and be friendly. Build those relationships so you can unstick information. And when you're working with a spouse or a person who's severely depressed, leaning into them saying, "Oh, you got to do better. You got to get out of bed before 2." That doesn't work. I mean, it's important to mention those things and encourage better behaviors, but when, like my mother, when her husband's in the hospital, just in horrible condition, there's a blood stain left over in the garage. She doesn't want to deal with anything, and I don't blame her.
Mhm.
So it's finding a way to identify that depression, put in those systems of support in there, and enable positive outcomes where you can. And in the end, me and my brother found, okay, mom, we need you to get this HIPAA form signed. We have to get you to show up so we can help you. Okay, from a power of attorney. Okay, you're the power of attorney. You have final say, but we're going to advise you on what we believe is the right decision to make. So when it comes to like do not resuscitates, comfort care, palliative care, hospice, those type of decisions that the power of attorney has to make or only can make, informing her with the right tools and encouraging her to make those decisions. So yeah, working with people who are traumatized by the event is no easy task, but you have to lean into it with emotional intelligence. We're all suffering in one way, shape, or form, and just wrap your arms around them with love and care and guide them in this journey as well as you're guiding yourself. Because for me and my brother, we're also figuring this out while we're in the middle of it. I mean, him and I would have conversations later on and we'd just vent. I mean, it was like a bunch of sailors just profanity laced, and we were having our own coping mechanisms around that. Um,
I'm
it's
glad you
also
said
hard
that
to,
because I was going to ask you, if you were elected, quote unquote, project manager here, then how were you dealing with it? How were you venting? Because I found it difficult myself when everyone was looking at me to do everything and take the lead on everything. When do I get to grieve? When do I get to feel that? And it was not easy. So, and in your case, I'm curious to know how you dealt with that.
ah, in the most unhealthy way possible by not dealing with it. It's on my list of to-dos. I at some point will need to allow myself the space to grieve and to process, but I've got other things that I'm not really willing to dive into right now that I have to work through that will help me through this process. And I don't know what those outcomes look like. But, I do know I miss my dad terribly. I've shed a ton of tears, but at the same time, it's not over yet. This is still being actively managed, even though my dad's no longer with us. In about a month is his memorial service. So there's all of that set up. If nobody's ever had to buy an urn off of Amazon, it's a wild experience, which I'm still reminded with my Amazon feed around urns and sizes, and it's just weird. Don't do it if you don't have to, but buying urns on Amazon's a lot cheaper than a funeral home. It's amazing what the markup is. But anyways,
Mm.
um, so yeah, I still need to go through my process of grieving for my dad. I haven't allowed myself to do that. And that's really bad on me. At some point, it'll root its ugly head, whether I like it or not. So I'd rather give it the space and the length of runway that it's going to need for me to get through that. But
Mhm.
first, I want to get through the memorial. If I can at least give myself that grace, my guess is probably on that drive back home from Illinois to Colorado, and there's 14 hours of grieving and a road filled with tears that I imagine I'll figure it out then. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, part of my process for dealing with the stress and trauma of the situation is I found David Goggins and Andrew Huberman on a podcast. And again, as I mentioned in a previous episode, David Goggins isn't for everyone, and I'm not recommending that you clone his approach, but there's some great tidbits to pull out of that. And with David Goggins and Andrew Huberman as part of the conversation, what Goggins would do when he's running these ultra marathons that are 300 or 400 miles at a time, like you don't stop until you run 400 miles, which could be days, is, he found a way to deal with his own personal adversity. He grew up illiterate, not well supported, abused, an extremely obese person, and he became this amazing soldier, Navy SEAL, amongst other massive accomplishments. He turned his life around for the better, but he figured out his skills to unlock that growth mindset, to enable himself in the most disabling situations. And I borrowed from that. And I would go on long walks with my dogs or, different or walks. And I would either introspect and retrospect and all those inspection type things and just work through that adversity. Are those decisions I made, were those appropriate? Were those right? Is this conversation I had with my mother or my brother or my aunt, were those beneficial? And if not, why? What could have been done better? Could have I steered the conversation, or was this car accident just going to happen, so to speak?
Mhm.
So working through all those different ways and reflecting on what could I do to improve things. That helped me out a lot and keep me centered and focused, as well as just dealing with the trauma, letting go what I can't control. I can't control how my family reacts. So why would I even attempt to control that? It is what it is. It's a high stress situation. People are going to react poorly. I need to accept that and not lean into it and make it worse by reacting poorly to their reaction. So I had my own coping mechanisms. A lot of the coping mechanisms transferred from my wife's alcoholism and that decade of adversity around that. So I already had my support people that I knew and trust. So I'd reach out to them and speak my truth. Again, the three truths: my truth, your truth, somewhere in the middle, the actual
Mhm.
truth.
Right.
But I would be able to share in my perspectives and my views on things. And that helped out a lot, getting feedback and self correcting around that. Um, and I also managed this from like 1,000 miles away. Each time I felt the need to travel to Illinois, some nasty weather system would come into play and shut down the airports, or we have the potential to strand me somewhere in Nebraska on I-70, or no, not I-70. Anyways, doesn't matter. Would strand me somewhere in Nebraska, which isn't always the most pleasant place to be stranded. So I made the decision that I'm going to stay in Colorado and manage this from afar. And in the end, it turned out to be the best decision. One, I was an hour behind. So it always helped me where I could reach out to the hospitals at very early hours, knowing that others wouldn't or couldn't. It also prevented me from getting COVID. All of my family in Illinois, who were part of my dad's care team there, all contracted COVID, minus my aunt. My mom did. My brother was impacted on it. I remember we were FaceTiming. They were all sitting in the living room when they found out that my mom has COVID. She had just taken her nasal test. It came back positive. I never seen so many people move so fast out of that house, like they could run away from COVID. It's like, yeah, dummies, you already are exposed, just whatever. But that means I didn't get COVID, because if I was there, I would be in that exact same boat. So that was nice, but at the same time, it's really hard to manage a spouse who has to quarantine for X amount of days, can't go see their husband in the hospital, and just mentally melts down on you. But again, you lean into that in a positive way. You support them, you encourage positive thinking, going, you can't control this either, just like I can't. Let it go. Let's focus on what you can do. You can pick up that phone. Here's the hospital phone number. Here's the extension to, dad's room. Here's the doctor's name and his number. You can call these people and we can work through this together. Heck, we can do a three-way call. Loop me in on this and I can help you when you struggle, and you can help me when I struggle. We'll just tag team this and work through it. So thank goodness for technology. Thank goodness for things like FaceTime, Zoom, Google Meet, whatever, connectivity we could do. Thank you for cell phones. Thank you for Google Docs and online collaboration. This allowed me to keep all of my stakeholders, which my family, I call them stakeholders, and then I have interested parties. I'm using work jargon on this because, again, I tried to separate myself emotionally out of this. And, I was able to keep my stakeholders and interested parties up to date. Over time, I realized my interested parties didn't need the same information as my stakeholders. There was a little bit of separation there. There was some family infighting and some crosstalk. And so it was a divide and conquer approach. Close family were my stakeholders. The others were interested parties and just didn't need to know all the facts. But yeah, it is really interesting. I'm thankful for technology. I'm thankful for tools. It allowed me to say goodbye to my dad. It allowed me to see what his care was like, as I could see nurses changing him and rotating him so he wouldn't get bed sores. And I could hear my dad attempt to talk, the garbledness that it was, and any mannerisms that he could eke out. And it gave me comfort knowing that he just wasn't there suffering. that he was trying to communicate, that he would make requests, that he wanted a Coca-Cola or ice chips or things like that, or you'd see him disrobed. I've never seen my dad naked so many times. Good Lord, I do not recommend that. But anyways, it's just some of those things, even funny things, positive things that came out of this. The Magic Mike nickname, I'll carry that for the rest of my life. You know, the robe, my dad disrobing, funny and appalling as it was, the dialogue with the nurses and how much they loved and cared for him. And I'm just so thankful for everyone who's part of that journey and an experience, because without any of them, he wouldn't have lasted as long as he did.
Right. On that note, we've come to the end of our second segment. We're talking with Jason Haas today about personal resilience, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about understanding limitations. We will be right back. If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.